Okay, good morning, everyone. Good morning to you, and welcome to this week's webinar from Work Avenue, the title of which today is, Are You Stuck and Looking at Career Change? Let me first of all introduce myself to you. I can see a lot of familiar faces on my screen this morning, and also some less familiar faces. My name is Emma May. If you can't see me, I've got a picture of a beach and the sea above my head. I'm the one talking at the moment. My job title at Work Avenue is that I'm Director of Operations and Employment. So what that means is that I'm responsible for all our service interventions that focus on assisting our clients into employment or back into employment. So every service offering that we offer our job-seeking clients comes under my remit. So we help with various interventions such as helping you with your CV, with interview skills, with looking at your transferable skills, how to reach out and network. Crucially, we also have a jobs board where people can engage with our job placements manager and actually be put forward for jobs if they have the suitable skills and experience and also working preferences. So that's the nature of our services. We're offering all our services virtually at the moment, as most organisations are. So what that means is that there's an awful lot of webinars taking place for our training courses, for our workshops, for our one-to-one meetings, and also for our weekly series of webinars. So today's webinar, I mentioned the job title before, it's Are You Stuck and Looking at Career Change? It's being run by a very warm and dear colleague of mine, I guess, David Levenson. I've known David for quite a number of years now. Let me tell you a little bit about him. He's the managing director of a small business called Coaching Futures. He's an executive coach, a career strategy coach, and a careers consultant. And he's an accredited practitioner of the Academy of Executive Coaching. Through his business and through his professional pathway, David wants to help people fulfill their ambitions to overcome their challenges that result from major changes or career transitions. So I felt that he was a very suitable person to be running the webinar today, because that's exactly what we're looking at. And David's going to be sharing some of his wisdom with us. Now, this is a webinar, you know, we're quite a way into the lockdown. In fact, we're coming out of the lockdown now, but we're all quite a way into our experience of using Zoom. So what I would say to you all is that the normal protocols for Zoom applies, which are, I would prefer if everyone can stay on their mute, because that just means we reduce the amount of echo and reverberation that we have going on the call. Do please ask any questions that you have on the chat and on the chat feature, and from time to time I'll be sort of working with David to sort of take pauses, take breaks, and David can address any questions that you may have as we proceed. Just to be transparent, we are recording this session and it will be available afterwards, either on our YouTube channel or also on our website as well. We have a section reserved for our videos as well. So if you miss bits of it, or you want to take another look to refresh your memory, it'll be there on our website and on our YouTube channel. Any other questions? I don't think so. Any other things before we start? I think we've just about covered everything. So David, if it's all right, I'm going to hand over to you right now.
Emma, thank you very much indeed, and thank you for the lovely introduction. I almost wish I'd written it myself.
Change that.
And thank you also for you and to Work Avenue for inviting me here today to talk to everyone. It's lovely to meet you all, even if it's the other side of a screen. Now, this session is for those of you, I hope you can all hear me okay, by the way. I should have just checked that first. If one or two hands up would be helpful, just to let me know if you want to wave. Emma, can you see some waves? Lovely, thank you. Session we've got this morning for you is for those of you who are currently out of work and looking for a new job, or perhaps you may be under threat of redundancy. You might be furloughed at present and you're unsure whether your job will still be there when furloughing ends. Alternatively, You may have just got to the point where actually you've just had enough of what you're doing and need to make a change. Now, this may have occurred to you because of everything that has happened in the past few months with COVID-19, and that's made you think about a new career, or it may be nothing at all to do with COVID-19. You were thinking about it already, but the pandemic intervened, and here we all are. Now, if none of the above applies to you, and you thought you'd signed up for something different, then you are free to press the leave meeting button and do something else for the next hour. I can tell you that it's much easier to do and a lot less embarrassing than walking out of a room full of people when you discover, as once happened to me, that you were in the wrong meeting and you can feel everyone's eyes following you out of the door. In the virtual world, no one will notice if you make a quick exit. But I hope you will stay, because we're going to pack a lot in over the next hour or so, and hopefully you will get something back for investing your time here today. Now, I find it helpful when doing these kind of events online to know a little bit about who I am talking to. So what I'd like to do is invite you to use the chat function just to introduce yourself by your first name only. And I'll do a few name checks in a minute. And at the same time, if you can let me know one thing that you have come here today that you would like to find out, just one thing. And that way I can see the sort of thing that you want, and hopefully I can cover as many of your points as possible. I can't promise, but we'll see how we go. Please, as Emma says, use the chat function at any stage to ask questions, and at certain points I will pause and ask Emma to kindly call out some of the questions that have come in. I'll also do my best to keep back 10, maybe 15 minutes at the end of the session for your questions, though I must warn you that timekeeping is not my strong point, and I could actually talk all day about job searching and career change, but Work Avenue isn't likely to let me to do that, and after a couple of hours you really would want to get up and leave. So let's now get started by seeing who's here and what have you come to look for. So I've got Jilly here, who says how to change direction and not make a big mistake. That's a really good point. You know, nothing is risk-free, but mistakes do happen, and even if they have happened before, there are many ways to retrieve those these days. Probably the topic for another webinar entirely. Hi Paula, how best to focus my time and activities, get next opportunity in the right place. Yes, we're certainly going to talk about that. Annie has changed countries. Hi Annie, and had COVID-19 intervene. Considering changing roles, how to take my existing skills into new roles. Yep, we're definitely going to cover that. Ellie, speedily persuading a potential employer why they should take someone from a different field, even with transferable skills. So that's a nice theme that's coming through here about transferable skills. We will definitely get onto that. Okay, keep those thoughts coming along. Now, what I want to cover this morning breaks down into two parts. First of all, I'm going to provide you with some data, after which I'm going to talk about how you get yourself job ready or get prepared for that sort of career shift, especially in the current difficult situation. We'll start with the data, which may sound a bit dry and boring at first, but I'd like to explain why I start here and why I think it's important. The reason is that when it comes to job searching, with or without a career change thrown in the midst of a global health and economic crisis like we've never known, or at least not for 100 years, when many sectors have shut down completely for a while, there are going to be a lot of people out there chasing not enough jobs for a long time to come, perhaps 12 to 18 months. Nobody knows precisely. The one certain way, I can say, of moving the odds in your favor for getting your next role and not expending your valuable time and energy chasing rainbows and unicorns is to have more knowledge about what is going on out there than the other candidates. I use the words data and knowledge rather than information deliberately, because there is a lot of information out there these days. Just ask Google, and you can spend hours at a time on the internet, and I know a lot of job seekers who do this, but it isn't going to be very useful to you in your search because much of it is just what it is, and that is noise. Even the data I'm going to share with you may not be directly relevant to your circumstances, but if there's one thing I hope you will remember and take away with you after this morning, it is the idea that the more relevant knowledge and data I can get in my hands that maybe others don't have, the better are my chances of getting my next job. And the final thing I want to say about this is that what I will share with you is not pretty. And while I haven't come here today to play Cassandra, it is better that we know what we have to contend with. So let's start with just yesterday. I was on Radio 4 yesterday morning. This was after my slides had already been prepared, when the Office for National Statistics, the ONS, released data for what's known as gross domestic product. It's essentially the measure that determines how well the country's economy is doing. GDP data for the month and quarter ending on May 31st. The figures are grim. No beating about the bush, and indeed they are worse than had been hoped for and expected. GDP declined by almost 20% in the 3 months from March to May. And that includes a 1% mini recovery in May. Well, that wasn't good enough, really. The Chancellor had been hoping for more like a 5% bounce in May, boosted by the return of construction sites and other businesses. And indeed, production output and construction did rally following steep declines in March and April. But the service industries, as we all know, remain very much in the doldrums. In total, the UK economy has lost a quarter of its GDP output between February and May. And the UK trade figures are even worse. UK trade is down 40% this year. And PwC is forecasting that exports will be down by 6 to 8% by the end of the year. And if there's no Brexit deal agreed with the EU, and who knows where that's heading, then the outcome next year will be a lot worse. Now, mention of PwC, I have found them to be a very informative source of data about the economic effects that COVID-19 has been having. They publish regular digestible updates on economic data and periodic reports on each sector. And I have put at the top of the chat box a couple of links, and when Emma will be sending you the slides from today afterwards, and I'll include those links as well in case you didn't get a chance to get them down from the chat box, to enable you to register for and access these reports should you wish to do so at your leisure. So the two that I've included are PwC's Economic Insights from their website, and also their industry focus, which comes out periodically. Now, on 24th of June, PwC reported that 79% of UK businesses had remained in operation throughout lockdown, with a further 9% reopening in the previous 2 weeks. So it's not all completely doom and gloom, and PwC was in fact anticipating more businesses coming back with the easing of lockdown restrictions in mid-June. But we know, of course, that the impact for businesses has been cushioned to an extent by the government's financial measures. And the fact that money has been made available through furloughing and business loan schemes, this has resulted in consumer confidence being at much higher levels than, for example, during the 2007-9 banking crash and ensuing recession, which I'm sure all of you on this call will probably remember. Some retailers have reported record levels of online spending. People who have still been receiving income with money in their pockets and nowhere to go have nowhere else to spend it. Now, this has given rise to something the economists have really made hay out of trying to explain to us. Most recessions are characterized by collapse in demand resulting in businesses being overstocked. This has not been the case with the pandemic crisis, at least not yet. The collapse in GDP output has been the result of the global disruption to production and supply chains, i.e. factories in the Far East, and distribution networks, transport, just being totally shut down for a couple of months. And these will take some time to recover to their full capacity, by which time more businesses will unfortunately have been forced to close because they haven't actually been able to source enough merchandise to sell. Now, what I'm going to do now is go to screen share, and which I will do in just a second, and start showing you some of this headline data from the PwC report. So, if you allow me just 1 minute, it's coming up now, and hopefully you can see that. Now I'm going to try and get the slide show operating. And there we are, the subject for today. Are you stuck looking at a career change? So here's what this data is saying. PwC compiled this in early May, but these headline forecasts for 2020 by sector. And they're saying that they haven't revised them significantly in more recent statements. And as would be expected, the worst of the outcomes will be in food services like pubs and restaurants, and also hotels and transport, such as air travel. They have two scenarios for sectors, what they call a smooth exit and a bumpy exit. And I've just shown smooth and bumpy for the pubs, restaurants, hotels and transport categories, but the other sectors that I've headlined there are sort of across the range of sort of from smooth to bumpy. And from here, you can kind of start to see some patterns emerging about which industries are going to be worst hit and therefore depressed for longer, and which may perhaps be more resilient. And we'll talk more about those resilient industries in a minute. Top of this shortlist, although I've reversed the order here, is actually healthcare and education. We clearly need all of that, and we need all of it to continue, followed by financial and IT services. Retail is expected to be shored up by moving more sales online. As I mentioned, some retailers are experiencing record sales. Of course, many retailers who didn't make this move fast enough in the past have already had to close their doors, and there has been an endless procession. As I'm sure if you followed the media, and indeed I know that some of you on this call today have been in the retail sector, and so you have, unfortunately possibly experienced this. Some of the procession of retailers that have been heading for administration since March has accelerated a trend that actually started around about 2 years ago, when close to 50,000 jobs in retail were lost in 2018. So far this year, 56,000 retail jobs have already gone, according to the Centre for Retail Research. Now, what does all this data mean for jobs? Well, that's where we're heading now. But before we do, Emma, can I ask you, have there been any questions that have come through on the chat? You'll need to unmute yourself first in order to let me know that.
I think I've unmuted myself. We have had a couple of questions on the chat, yes.
Yeah, go ahead.
So in fact, we've had quite a few. Where do I start?
Any themes particularly that are there?
Yeah, there's a few themes coming through about age-related issues. I've been in a certain field for quite a number of years. I'm now a little bit older. Need to think about refocusing there.
Yep.
Then we've also had some specific questions as well. Jonathan has asked, he has some challenges as a person who's lost his sight, and so needs to think about change with specific challenges that presents in mind. But a lot of people are just basically asking questions relating very understandably to their own situation, their own career change, having been in one career path for quite a number of years. And then Michael asks, is the adage networking is king? Does that prevail for job search? Which is obviously an overarching question, and one that is very, very relevant, I think, it's at the heart of everything, actually.
That's brilliant, and thanks for those questions. I will certainly be covering some of those, but let me just pick up on a couple of them straight away. Yes, Absolutely is the answer on networking. In fact, you know, I have a friend, a recruiter I know very, very well, a very good recruiter, who says that as you move up the career ladder, something like your chances of getting your next role through networking rather than through advertised roles is around about 80%. There's a kind of 80-20 rule here.
I would concur.
So networking is huge, and I know that in Work Avenue you talk a lot about the power and the importance of networking and how to do it well. And I will probably touch on that as well a little bit in the second half. I just wanted to pick up the question that was it a gentleman I think who raised about impaired sight and working. Interestingly, I've been talking with a lot of employers during the lockdown phase about how they have tackled things. And one of the things that has come back is that the fact that so many of their workforces, in some instances, the whole of their workforces have moved online and working from home, has made them realize that the opportunity for people with disabilities of all kinds start to level the playing field up a bit. And they've started putting the word out to their HR teams to really take this seriously. We really should be able to offer more employment opportunities for people with disabilities when a lot more people are going to be working at home in any event, and that starts to level the playing field up for people in that situation. And hopefully that would apply to this gentleman as well, obviously with the right adaptations. So I'm going to very briefly run through, because I can hear there is an appetite for getting on to the, you know, some of these practical issues. But yes. I just wanted to look at show you a little bit about this PwC data, and this comes actually, sorry, this isn't PwC. This is data compiled by the ONS from job adverts posted by Adzuna. I don't know if some of you have ever come across Adzuna or been on any of their websites. They're one of the largest aggregators of online job boards. And job adverts are actually a better indicator of economic activity than the more traditional job vacancies, as they take account of new roles and existing roles that employers are planning to refill rather than just to scrap. And I have put a link up where you can get more information about this data that the ONS posts. Now, they analyze the data over about 40 categories. I've selected 20 of them. I've sort of created a kind of employment Premier League, if you like. So on 2 slides here, I've got a top half and a bottom half of ones which I think are most likely to interest us, particularly because they are maybe less specialized. I've missed out things like scientific roles or defense or things like that, because of one of the things that some of you mentioned in the earlier chat comments. It's where you look to make your transferable skills really work for you. And you want to know which are the sectors where you're more likely to get some activity. So this Premier League, as I say, appears on 2 slides. And the most recently released week's data is from Friday, the 3rd of January. Friday, the 3rd of July, my apologies. The data is indexed, as you will see from the top of the slide. 100 means the average of weekly job adverts posted in 2019. Adzuna posts millions and millions of adverts, nearly 1 million a week, and that's why the ONS have been using them for this information. And it's interesting to see that top of the list is a generic category of part-time and weekend work. Now, it's something of a quirk, because Adzuna say that online recruiting for these kind of more casual jobs is a comparatively recent phenomenon. Now, I appreciate that weekend working in particular is not going to be everyone's cup of tea for those of you on this call. And at the moment, demand is likely to be in hospitality, in facilities management, cleaning up offices, ready for the week's work, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, if you are looking for part-time work, let's say to supplement your main income or a pension, it is worth bearing in mind that this may be a source worth mining. And in fact, part-time and weekend job adverts nearly doubled from around the 8th of May, from an index of 73 to 132. That's 1/3 times more than the average of those jobs being posted in 2019, and they've been rising steadily since. When you get under these figures, there are some other interesting trends to note. Online job ads, for example, for admin, clerical, and secretarial staff, number 4 on this list, shot up in mid-May from a factor of 39 to 83, more than doubled, and has been relatively stable since then. I must admit that when I saw this statistic, it was a bit of a surprise to me. And maybe these ads take into account demand for virtual assistants as businesses started to reopen while staff were still mainly working remotely or were furloughed. If you have any of your own ideas, then do please put them up on the chat and share them with others, because it might be quite interesting. Now, it's very easy to get blinded by the numbers, but you can start to notice certain trends. 4 months ago, at the beginning of March, when hiring was still around 75% of 2019 levels, you see some parts of the post-Brexit economy actually doing rather well. Graduate recruitment. I'm going to go to the bottom. Sorry, I'm now on the bottom half. Beg your pardon, I have already flipped over. Just checking I'm in the right place. I apologize, I flipped over too soon. So one from the bottom or above the all industries line is graduate recruitment. Now that was doing very well, but has fallen off a cliff dramatically during the COVID period from an index of 145 to just under 40. Similarly, and I will now go to the bottom half, sales. For those of you who are in the world of sales, demand, unfortunately for you, has fallen dramatically from something like an index of 140 at the beginning of lockdown to 30. In the relegation zone, HR and recruitment, senior management hiring is, I'm afraid, very depressed. Maybe these jobs won't be coming back in a hurry, and it might be a better strategy to turn aside from these highly pressured jobs and pivot somewhere else. The voluntary sector, as we know well, was already under severe pressure long before COVID-19 came along. I'm going to pause again, Emma, just to ask if there is any questions coming through specifically about certain sectors.
Well, I'm not, that's fine.
Yes, no, I can hear you.
That's fine. So a lot of, there have been questions relating quite a lot to change of sector. You know, issues of moving, someone has raised the issue, we talked about the questions relating to age-related sort of discrimination in job search. That was coming up earlier. I've also seen questions about moving from one sector to another quite a lot. So someone was asking about moving from the not-for-profit sector to the private sector. And someone else asked about, you know, again, sort of echoing that theme, issues, Ellie was asking, issues of changing your job fields. You know, are you even likely to be considered, regardless of whether you've got the skills or not? Because there's always going to be someone from that field who's going to sort of be a jump above you, or so, you know, you might believe.
So
a lot about changing sector,
yeah.
Moving on, very much practical questions.
So I think the key point about changing sectors is to recognize that it can be done, and if you set that as your objective, you can achieve that. And I will come on to talk about those transferable skills, or how to, if you like, identify those transferable skills that you can move into something else. So let's say, for example, looking at these lists, if you've been in, let's go to the lower half of the table, and let's say that you've been in the wholesale and retail sector, the retail sector, let's say, for some period of time. Now, in retail, clearly you're going to know an awful lot about customer service, and there may be particular functions in the top half. You see, customer service and support is looking a little better in the top half of the table, where you might be able to apply those kind of skills. On the age-related point, I highlighted admin, clerical, and secretarial in particular, because I know that if you have had a job, let's say in marketing, let's say in project management or facilities, and that job has now gone, but you've accumulated a lot of really good organizational skills, then you might be able to apply those into these categories: admin, clerical, secretarial, and indeed marketing and advertising, which is still, although demand in those sectors has come down, they're still doing rather better than some of those in the lower half of the table. Moving from the not-for-profit sector to the into the private sector is a whole conversation in itself. But again, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility. But if you're considering moving sector, the trick is not to try and take more than one leap at a time. So I would caution against looking for a higher level or a more highly paid job necessarily in another sector before you've actually made the move across into that sector, because that undoubtedly will be a harder ask, and any prospective employer is going to ask some serious questions of you if you get to that interview stage about your ability to make what is in a sense two transitions at once. So walking before you run, I think is probably the headline here in terms of moving across sectors. Okay, so hopefully that's given you some idea of where to start looking with some of these sectors. And I'm going to just round this off by this, this reference to
Phoenix. Yes, I think that's a good idea, because I think people do want to move on to some of the practical advice.
Yeah,
which
very good. Okay, so I will leave those. You'll be able to see them when I send through the slides about which industries have sort of managed their way through and which are the ones which are going to rise again. So now let's talk about what you do. And moving online in itself requires a certain mindset. I mentioned to you that I know a lot of job seekers who spend all their time just plowing through things, looking at job boards on the internet, thinking, shall I apply for this? Shall I apply for that? Looking things up. It can be a very dispiriting endeavor. So I like to talk about the Mars effect. And many of you will remember, of course, Mars a day, work, rest and play, as a kind of way of breaking up your day's activity. Your work is all about that next role, researching, using the data that I've highlighted intelligently, doing the networking, as someone mentioned earlier. That's really key to helping you get that next role. But take time to back out of that. Actually think about what you've been doing, whether at the end of each day, or if you prefer at the beginning of the following day, perhaps at the end of the week, whatever it is, to just think about what you've been doing, reflecting on what you've been doing, and importantly, thinking about what you could be doing to add to your skills and knowledge to help you get that job, because that's going to become increasingly important, as I mentioned, with so many people pursuing so few things. And finally, the play bit of it. Do make sure you have time. Perhaps we all feel that we've had too much of this time and we really do want to just get back to work. But do make sure that you take the time outs as well. That's really important. So
if I can intervene with a very relevant question that's come in on the chat. You've been asked, given the current economic climate, would you recommend trying to get a job with your current skills as opposed to trying to learn a new skill, or in other words, branch off into a completely new direction? Which do you think is, and obviously everyone's situation will vary, but what's your thoughts on that?
So there's a little bit of both here, but I would suggest that the priority is actually to evaluate your own skills, your own experiences and knowledge that you have acquired through all of your roles. And when I work as a career strategy coach with people, that is something that I encourage everybody to do, because we have often, if we've had a career going 25, 30, 35 years in some instances, we have often forgotten some of the things that we not just know, but that we used to do. And those skills, if you are forensic about it and you go back and you write them down and recall them, will be of value to you. And you can then identify which are the ones which will transfer into other sectors and utilize those. I would say that learning a new skill is an important supplement if you know you're going to need it for a particular industry or a particular sector that you're targeting, or if you even have an opportunity to get a job where you meet most of what the employer is looking for, but then you're in a position to say, well, actually, I've not done a bit of this before, but I tell you what, I'm going to go and get myself, whatever training or whatever it is I need in order to be able to do that. And don't necessarily be shy about owning up to a prospective employer that that's what you're seeking to do. That's the way I would suggest you would augment the skills, but not necessarily start with that.
I would endorse that completely. And we say very strongly, play to your strengths. Always play to your strengths. I do believe that we love what we're good at, and we're good at what we love. So it goes around and it comes around. So if what you're thinking of doing is learning an entirely new skill, almost, and this is the extreme, of course, but almost as a knee-jerk reaction to take yourself into a completely new direction, it's possible that will work out for you, but it's also possible that it won't, because the risk factors to that are very, very high. Play to your strengths, augment what you're doing, supplement what you're doing. And when people do change career, they very seldom change in a complete 180 about turn. Exactly as David said, normally what they do is they're enhancing and endorsing something that they've got and notching their career by harnessing their transferable skills and moving it slightly into a different direction, taking with them what they've already got.
100%.
We're saying the same thing in just different words.
Yeah, no, 100%. I agree with that entirely. So moving online, how does networking work? Well, when lockdown first started, kicked off, I discovered that you could have conversations with pretty much anybody that you wanted to. Surprisingly so. Now things have sort of returned a little bit, but it is still possible to do that. So if you've got in mind somebody who you think may be able to help you get that role, then just call them up or drop them a message, pop them a message on LinkedIn or wherever it is that you operate, and say, do you want to have a chat for half an hour next week? Suggest a time. And suggesting a time is important. Take charge of that conversation. Don't just float out an invitation for to have a conversation, a networking conversation with someone, and rely on them to come back to you to say, okay, I might be available in 3 weeks' time on Friday afternoon at 4 o'clock. You take charge of the situation, take the initiative, suggest some times, and you'll be surprised. More people than you might think at this moment are willing to come back to you. Obviously, it depends how you frame that approach. And manage that time really well so that the other person knows that you're not seeking to engage them for hours and hours. They won't have that. So, half an hour, whatever it might be. And it's very easy if you're going to do this using Zoom or using any other virtual medium, to actually set a time and the other person knows that's all the time that you're asking of them. And always leave with the possibility that, that was a really interesting conversation. There were 3 things I wanted to talk to you about, and thanks very much for your time today on 2 of those. Just got this one other thing I'd love to discuss with you. Could we meet up again? Build on those relationships. It's easier than you imagine to do that online than in coffee shops, as we've perhaps been used to. And when working in this way, it's really important to keep ourselves, minds and bodies in check, and also to reward ourselves from time to time. And when we need help, as you all know, and you'll know this from coming to Work Avenue and other things that you do in the wider community and so on, when you help someone else, you feel good, and then also that other person may be more inclined to help you. So paying forward is really important at this time, always recognizing that there's probably someone out there whose need is greater than yours. So plant those seeds in terms of that networking now, because that will help you to harvest those later on. And be willing to explore, have those exploratory conversations with people, and really believe in yourself. As Emma says, rightly, play to your strengths, because that will give you the confidence to go out there and have those conversations, which may take you outside of your comfort zone. But actually, this is the way that you will be able to expand your horizons, maybe look at opportunities outside your immediate, what you think is your immediate realm of experience, and help you get that next role in whatever context it is. Now, I want to just mention something very briefly, and I'm going to be very brief because I know that Work Avenue talks a lot about this as well in its sessions. But just to make this point, that when you are online, you are creating a persona, you are creating a personal brand. And it's important to recognize this. And there are many, many ways that you can appear online, and I have not named all of them. But I just mention here the three which I think are the most important. LinkedIn, for me personally, is the most important platform. And for any job seeker, I would argue it is the most important, because that is what recruiters use most of all when they're managing their own campaigns. So that's all about business when you're on LinkedIn. Now, Facebook has become really interesting. I was on a Zoom call with a group recently who said, the youngsters have basically abandoned Facebook because, of course, they're all on Instagram and TikTok, if TikTok's still around, not quite sure, and all these other things. And actually, what's happened is that Facebook has been left to us sort of more oldies, if you like, baby boomers, so on. And actually, Facebook is interesting from the point of view of groups that get together and discuss things like jobs and sectors and different industries. And then finally, if you are minded to actually publish anything about yourself on video, then having a YouTube channel can be a value augmentation to your personal brand. I just mentioned briefly a few things about LinkedIn. Again, Work Avenue, I know does cover a lot of this in terms of how to get your profile right, how to build that up, how to use content effectively. Here's just a few headlines that I want to chip in with myself. I want to point out to you, the next time you look at your LinkedIn profile, ask yourself, have I ever looked at this thing which appears a scroll or two down called My Dashboard, which has got 3 pieces of data on it, 2 of which tells you something about whether people on LinkedIn are looking for you. One is the number of profile views that have happened in the last 90 days on your LinkedIn timeline. And the other is the number of times your profile has appeared in search inclusions, for example, by a recruiter. That dashboard is your best friend on LinkedIn, because it will tell you, it will give you some information underneath those statistics about who are the kinds of people who might be looking for you. And that might tell you something about which recruiters, which sectors, which companies, which prospective employers are then worth securing. So following up. So be curious about any of those pieces of data and information that have come up on your timeline and through the dashboard. Harvest your connections. Whether you've got 100 connections or 1,000 or 10,000, whatever it is, we all know that many of those connections are just people who have clicked yes to the connection. I never seek connections that way, by the way, by just pressing the connect button. I always send a personal message with a connection request. And if someone asks me for a connection request, if I know I want to connect, I will. If I definitely know I don't, because it's, let's say, a digital marketeer, I won't. But if I'm not sure why the person might want to connect with me, I always go back with a question, either with an InMail question, preferably, and you have 5 InMail messages a month available to you if you're a free user of LinkedIn, more if you're a premium user. And I say thanks very much for for inviting me to your network. Use that kind of language. Is there a reason? Is there anything specific you'd like to talk about with me? And sometimes you won't get an answer back, but sometimes you might. And then, hey presto, you've got a new network, a networking connection that way, a real one as distinct from just a number. Line up your targets on LinkedIn using that information, using the connections, using the data that comes through your dashboard, and always follow up if you've not heard something from somebody who you really know that you want to talk to. Come back and in a week's time or a fortnight's time and have another go and see if you can get their attention again. Has anything come up about networking online, Emma, that you want to mention?
Well, actually, Jilly has asked a question very relevant to LinkedIn. She said, if you're considering a change, should you adapt your LinkedIn profile accordingly? In other words, to reflect the pathway you'd like to move into, but at the same time, risk looking unfocused. In other words, should you be backwards and forwards, risk the change? And then there's another question from Joelle, which is any advice if you're changing from self-employment to employment, which of course is another whole thing altogether. But those are the 2 questions that have come up most recently.
So, to Jilly and Joelle, Jilly, first of all, that question is a really tricky one, and I must admit, and I know many others sort of struggle with this as well, because of course LinkedIn is such a versatile platform that you can play in different directions at once. And I think my guidance would be, if you're very sure of what your brand is and what you're what you're targeting, then stick with that in your profile, in your headline, in your about section, your summary. But if you are looking at something slightly different and you want to change what your offer is, then maybe do that for a period of time and work out a campaign to attract attention from organizations in that sector. And I'm sure that if you go to along to Work Avenue, they will help you quite a bit with how to adapt your profile for that purpose. Run a campaign targeting that people and see what comes back. As I say, be curious, harvest the connections. And if that campaign has worked, stick with it. If it hasn't, then maybe go back to what you were doing before, or make a different kind of change. I think that for Joelle's point, I would say that probably moving from self-employed to an employed situation probably will require a fairly wholesale change to your LinkedIn profile to make that work, if that's what you're seeking to do. But any of those are possible. Experimenting is certainly worth doing on LinkedIn. It's always have the opportunity to experiment with it and just see what works.
Yeah. John has commented very interestingly that when you post on LinkedIn, it can reverberate. He put a post up last week which has been viewed more than 4,000 times, and he can see the sectors and organizations that people are from who've commented. So you have that amazing platform of reach and data that you can, that you can, as a springboard, if you like, to further interactions and engagement.
Well done to you, John. I wish I was getting that kind of reach with some of my posts. And actually, if I can ask the question and John could perhaps chat it back, the nature of that post, was there some sort of slightly personal element to it? Because I must admit that what I find gets the most number of views and the most number of reactions is when you put on something a little bit personal about yourself, because believe it or not, that's what people like. It's not just on Facebook, it's on LinkedIn as well. And you start to get that reverberation, as you say. And the other point to make about LinkedIn is if people cotton onto it very quickly, and you start getting likes and reactions and comments and shares very quickly, then you get the audience coming back very quickly as well. If John comes back, you can let me know in a little bit. Emma,
what John has put, he's actually put his he's put a link to the activity on the chat, which
great.
So it's right there for people to see.
Fantastic, that's great. So I'm gonna just move on because we are pressed for time, and then we
have another 5 minutes or so, David.
Right. Okay. So I'm going to speed through these, but they're obviously going to be available through on the slides. Interviewing online. One thing to really think about if you find yourself in a job interview online is you actually, remember British Gas, you actually do have more control than you think, because people on the other end are actually going to be, in a sense, waiting for you. I love this picture because it does give a sense of the person being interviewed, being in the driving seat, being in charge, whereas the panel on the other side, they're all sort of grouped together, and look how they're smiling. They're responding to what the person is saying. Sometimes online, it can work even better than when you're in the room. Try and avoid, obviously, the glaring mistakes. That's about preparation beforehand, so that you don't have nasty glitches that might happen when you're doing the call. And use pausing effectively. If something has happened on the line and you've not heard the question clearly, or even if you have, but you just want to take a minute to think about it for a second, do just say, "Could you just repeat what you were saying just there?" Everybody will understand, that's perfectly reasonable thing to ask in an online context, easier to do than when you're in a room. One of the drawbacks people say with online is that you can't necessarily get across your personality in the same way, because all people can see is your head, and maybe your head moving a little bit. And as you can see, and I hope you can see at the moment, I do like to use hands. Hands are the best additional accessory you have when you're online to emphasize something, to make a point. So make use of that. And by the way, at the moment, there are a lot of jobs, unfortunately, which are being advertised and even going to recruitment stage, which in the end turn out not to be real jobs. If you're on a first interview, it's worth just chipping in little questions that actually will give you an indicator as to whether there's really going to be a job at the end of this, and whether it's worth pursuing, rather than the employer is just putting it out there for the moment, but doesn't really have a real intention to apply. And I just throw this one up here, and just to comment that now what's happening in job interviews is that the questions are starting to be asked about, well, what have you been getting up to during the pandemic? That's becoming a rather popular question. So just take a note of some of these tips, and about the kind of questions that you might be asked that in the past you may not have been. When you get back into the office, if the office ever does reopen, first of all, there's going to be a much smaller number of people. There'll be social distancing and so on. These are where you're going to note the differences in terms of the office space itself, in terms of relationships, because a lot of that will still be online. Your induction process may well be handled online. Insist that that's done and done well. Your workload and management of it may well be different, because online hours tend to be rather more variable than working hours. But set the expectations right for yourself and with your employer, and manage your well-being while you're doing all of that is really important. I am speeding through these, but some interesting questions are starting to emerge in businesses about, well, how are things actually working now? More and more organizations moving to virtual teams which work across functions to get problems solved. I heard of an interesting business that had to, that put a virtual team formed from people from all sorts around the organization. They were involved in the care sector. They needed to get PPP urgently, and a virtual team formed to just solve that problem. Nobody at the top told them what to do. You may find you have more interaction with co-workers than you had previously. And anyone in these circumstances can be the leader, not just the designated leader. So remote workers actually have the potential of being able to deliver more. Think of all of that commuting time that's being saved. For example, meetings tend to run more efficiently online. There is the opportunity actually for more trust and open dialogue in these situations. Make sure that you and indeed your contacts are really mentally present and engaged. It's quite easy to recognize the people who are looking down and maybe doing something else. And it's more difficult to see what they're doing than if you were actually in the room with them. If you're running such a meeting, then check in with people at the beginning and at the end. Just take a few minutes to find out. I hope we still have 1 or 2 minutes today to find out how it's gone for everybody. And continue with that networking. And there will always be issues with technology. Just don't let that get on top of you and your colleagues' lives just like that now. So I'm going to give you sign off, Emma, with 3 things that I want to suggest that you might want to consider doing now. One is, first of all, to really think hard about what it is that I really want to do next, whether it's I need to get myself another job, same line that I've been doing, or maybe I want to do that career change. Perhaps I've had enough of what I've been doing. I've been doing the same thing for 30 odd years. I had a primary career. I want to start a secondary career. Whatever it is, really ask yourself that question. And then once you've established that, the next thing to think about, and we've alluded to this earlier because the question was asked about the transferable skills. What are those skills, competencies, knowledge and experience that I can bring to my next role? Be really forensic about that, because your CV will not necessarily remember all of those things for you. You've got to try and remember yourselves. What are those things that I've done that I could bring to the next role, particularly if I want to move into a different sector? And finally, do that homework, reverting back to what I started with. What other knowledge and data will I need to help me get there and help me to be the candidate that actually is preferred, the one that's outstanding and will get that role? These are the things that I cover, particularly when I'm working with people as a coach. At the moment, I'm available. Anybody who wants to get hold of me, and I did indeed revamp my LinkedIn profile at the beginning of lockdown to say, look, I'm just a click away. And you'll have these contacts. If you want to get in touch with me to have a conversation, just book some time on my website, drop me an email or a phone call. That conversation will be absolutely free. You need not worry at all. And that's kind of it from me, Emma. Sorry, it was a bit of a speed run towards the end there, but we just about managed to get everything in. If there's a last question that is worth throwing into the mix, then please do so while I unshare.
I don't know. Does anyone have any further questions? That was really, really helpful. I think there was a lot of very practical tips on there from David. Yeah, I got a thumb. I can see a few thumbs up on the screen. Thank you very much for that. There was a question about, can you pass on your contact details? And as if by magic, you managed to do that without me even asking the question. So that was remarkable and excellent of you. So thank you very, very much. David, I want to, if there's no further questions, which doesn't look like there are on the chat, we have covered a lot of ground this morning. A little sort of PS from me, which is it's very hard to reshape a career pathway, to reshape a working life simply by a wave of the magic wand. It just doesn't happen like that. It takes a lot of investment, you know, in yourself. It also takes a lot of, I would say, a lot of courage to ask yourself some difficult questions and be brave about hearing the answers that you give yourself. And also be prepared to listen to the answers that sometimes other people help you to move towards. It's very much a step-by-step iterative process that each of us has to take. I can tell you, speaking for myself and also speaking for David, which I don't really want to do, but I'm going to as we close this session today, both David and I have changed our career pathway. And therefore we are both proof that it can be done, again, step by step, having a little bit of courage, and also making sometimes a bit of a leap of faith as well along the way. Things don't happen by accident. You do have to make them happen. David did share his contact details, so do be free, do feel free to be in touch with him directly if you'd like to. I will be sending these slides out to everyone. It may not be until next week, but so don't panic if you haven't received them today, but the slides will be shared with you all. Just a couple of closing remarks from me, which are Work Avenue can also help with exactly all of these issues as well. We have a team of experienced and professional employment and careers advisors. We are all professionally qualified, highly experienced. You can reach us either by phoning the work office main number, which is 020-8371-3280. That's 020-8371-3280. Alternatively, if you visit our website and go to, so that's www.theworkavenue.org.uk/meeting. So that's theworkavenue.org.uk/meeting. You can request a one-to-one appointment directly from that way as well. I would also tell you that these webinars, we run webinars weekly or fortnightly, and 2 weeks from now, well in fact 2 weeks from now minus a day, on Tuesday the 28th of July, our next employment webinar is on the subject of volunteering your way into employment. It's at 2 o'clock in the afternoon on Tuesday the 28th of July. You can, we will be sending out a little bit of marketing reach, so you see about that. But also, if you visit our website, it's on our website as well. There are many, many ways of skinning a cat, this particular cat being signing up to our events. Just go to our events page, that's /events. You'll see everything there. And nothing, the best advice will always be bespoke, one-to-one, when you meet with an advisor who can talk about you, your situation, your agenda, your preferences, and everything else. So please do book a one-to-one appointment, and we will be very, very, very happy to assist each and every one of you. I wish you all a super, super day today. David, thank you again for taking your time out this morning. It was very, very much appreciated. All of you have a good day, and see you next time. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Emma, and thank you everybody for joining. Hope it was worthwhile for you.
Then. Many thanks. Bye-bye now.
Bye-bye.